What is up, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Flex Podcast. I am your host, Chris Raybon, joined as always by one of the top rankers in the game, in Sean Koerner. And today we're going to be talking all about fantasy football busts. And to do that, we got a very special guest, one of my favorite dudes in the industry. He's at PFF. You've probably seen him on Twitter, Ian Hartitz. Ian, what's going on? Thanks for taking the time.
Love pod with you guys. Once upon a time, we all worked under the same damn
Yeah.
umbrella. Times have changed, but we still find the time to get back and bark once or twice a year. So always good to be joining the squad. Obviously blessed to be in the presence of, I forget how many times he finished number one ranker, Sean Koerner himself. And Chris, just you were one of the first people to edit my articles back in the day, man. So truly have learned so much from both of you. And yeah, pumped here to be talking some fades. It's always easy to talk about the Dameon Pierces of the world that everyone has good stuff to say about. We'll see what happens today.
Yeah, exactly. These are the episodes I love. We get to kind of shit on guys, and I think we need more of that in the industry, though, because everyone always wants to talk up guys, and I feel like people are overwhelmed. They feel like they need to draft everybody. So I think it's good to get these in. Just a reminder: make sure you rate and review the pod. We choose our favorite 5-star review each and every week, and you get a free year of Action Pro. So be sure to keep those reviews coming. We really appreciate you listening. I'm going to start because Ian, we're doing this we're recording this on roster cut day. So is there any cuts out there that happened to guys that maybe you were like, oh man, I really like them. You might have been like unreasonably standing for that just got the boot?
Bro, I was in the middle of a podcast and I monitor Twitter for like just big news or stuff breaking, and I just see like 20 mentions come in, and I just go, oh no, it's Auden Tate, isn't it? And, of course, the guy I was hoping could be the Falcons wide receiver one, man. Like, it was an early cut too. He didn't even make it to preseason week 3, unfortunately. So we'll see, guys. We got a bunch of spring leagues popping up around, so hopefully my guys. I had someone ask me like, what team do you hope Auden Tate winds up on next? And I was like, hopefully it's the NFL. That's kind of just the goal.
The Houston
at this
Gamblers.
Yeah, man. Why the hell not? But yeah, couldn't quite get there with Odd, and then Duke Johnson gets cut today. I'm just happy my guy CPAT is still the running back, y'all, in Atlanta.
Oh yeah, CPAT is he's the man. Like he's gonna ball out.
Bargain, baby.
Yeah. All right, let's get into this fantasy bus episode. And Sean, I'll start with you since I just asked Ian about the cuts. But name a bust before we get started. Just like who stings the most that you drafted, and if you ever drafted a bust, I don't know.
Oh yeah,
Mr. Oddsmaker over here.
Believe me, I have drafted plenty of busts. My favorite bust of all time is actually my first draft pick of all time in 1998. I was like 9 years old, and I selected Cordell Stewart with my first pick.
Flash.
Yeah.
And he was awful that year. He threw like 12 touchdowns, 18 interceptions. He only ran for like 400 yards. Like he was a dual threat quarterback back then. But the league I was in didn't really, it wasn't the type of league to really draft a quarterback like Cordell. So I ended up picking up Randall Cunningham week 1. And I only played Cordell like twice that entire season. And that's where I learned at a very young age, don't draft quarterbacks early.
Ooh.
That's a good bust though. Like he played 16 games. You had to find someone else. Like that's the worst part when someone's like, oh yeah, Christian McCaffrey busted for me 2 years ago. Like, yeah, we can't predict the injuries all the time. Come on.
Yeah,
right,
man,
but this was an awful pick by just completely awful.
Like you were one of those guys that just takes a quarterback early in the draft.
Yeah, this league you should, because it's 6 points for a passing touchdown. But Cordell, he doesn't really throw touchdowns. It was just an awful pick. But picking up Randall Cunningham was a good pickup. So I learned quickly from my mistakes.
What about you, Ian?
A couple summers ago, best ball, I hadn't quite learned things like having reasonable exposures to guys. And every time I got in his late double-digit rounds, Chris Herndon, how many times can you pass up someone attached to Sam Darnold and Adam Gase? And I just had this one damn stat I recited in every podcast I went on, probably said it on this one, where it's like 9 rookie tight ends that averaged at least 8 or 9 yards per target. And it was Herndon, a bunch of like multi-time all-pros. And I remember having, another old friend of ours, Matthew Friedman, on the pod and reading him that stat, and he was just like, it's a good group, but if we're going to pick the exception out of that group, I think it'd probably be Chris Herndon, and it certainly ended up turning out that way. I think nowadays we can describe it as that, the soldiers meme, and they got the one clown there. Yeah, the one clown was Chris Herndon. He went out there and was a prime pass blocker and murdered a good 50-60% of my best ball team. So kind of love those summer of 2019 Chris Herndon, Jay Sternberger stacks that just seemed so great at the time.
Jace, oh man, that is a callback to Matthew Friedman. I mean, him and Koerner are on this very pod debating this guy with I think it was Tunyon at the time. So yeah, that's
we were so close. We were so close to getting that right.
Man, for me, I think it has to be Darren McFadden. There was one year where there was a few years in there like there was just like no running backs to take if like you missed out on the first few in the first round, and so I was like all hyped on Darren McFadden. Took him in like round 2 or something. And
is this like Raiders or Cowboys? Which?
This is Raiders McFadden. This is Raiders. McFadden. Yeah. He was on the Cowboys. I don't even remember. That must have been right.
He had the 1 year.
Oh yeah. That was like okay. Yeah. It was worse. It was
Man. It was them Joseph Randall, Darren McFadden year. Trying to figure it out.
I had a ton of Joseph Randall too, but he did have that one game where he had like. I think
because Atlanta,
yes. So hey, it's not all bad.
We got that one game. We'll always have that one.
Always have that one game. What was the dude on the Cowboys that got everyone? Ogletree. That dude Kevin Ogletree. That he balled out that week 1 and just never heard from him again.
The Sammy Watkins week 1 honor of excellence.
That's a good. I'm sure some people would name Sammy Watkins in this category, but let's jump into let's talk about a little bit about how we kind of go about identifying these guys more generally. Ian, when you're kind of going up and down the draft board, what are some of the things you look at that just kind of give you a red flag?
I think a lot of times seeing guys with similar archetypes as another player and just the discrepancy in picks, because I think when you've done enough drafts like we have kind of throughout the summer, you have different roster constructions and you're able to kind of see what you're feeling better about early on versus later. But for me, it's like seeing Joe Burrow going for, not to just spoil my pick, but Joe Burrow's going like pick 55. It's not just Burrow as like the QB 6 or 7 or wherever he's being drafted. I think that's actually a reasonable spot, but it's when I have Burrow at pick 55. I'm not fading Joe Burrow. I'm fading pick 55. Joe Burrow, when I can get, in my opinion, like poor man's versions of him in Derek Carr, Kirk Cousins, 50 picks later. And then when I'm picking Derek Carr or Kirk Cousins, who are we really picking them against? Some wide receiver 4s, wide receiver 5s, maybe a running back we kind of like. When I'm taking Joe Burrow in round 5, like there's a Monroe St. Brown sitting there. There still might be George Kittle falling down the ranks sitting there. And so for me, it's that combination of a player that, we might like positionally, but where are they going in the overall scheme of things? And am I really reaching on them? Is it worth reaching on them enough to basically alter my line of construction moving down the line? So for me, the 2 quarterbacks that just, again, I think there's lesser versions of them, but just far more affordable at ranges of the draft I like more. I'll take Kyler Murray and Jalen Hurts in round 6 instead of Josh Allen in round 3. And then, the Kirk Cousins, Derek Carr types, again, literally 50 picks later after someone like Joe Burrow.
Yeah, that's a really good point. When we talk about busts, I think a lot of people kind of hone in on specific players or, things that like they just don't like, where a lot of times it can just be because of where you're drafting the player and what position he is, that can contribute to that. Sean, what about you? Like, what do you look for when you're kind of sniffing out a bust?
Yeah, I agree with that logic. Just there are points in the draft where I'm just ignoring a position altogether. So I'm going to have less exposure. But we have to remember, if you're in a 12-team league, you're fading 92% of the player pool. So I'm mostly focusing on the players I want. And then just by, proxy, I'm going to like miss out on a bunch of guys in a bunch of my drafts. So that's kind of how I identify who I'm considering a bust. But it's typically players that perform closer to their ceiling the previous season, and you're expecting regression, or just their ADPs through the roof. There's a lot of guys that I'm going to mention today that I love. But they're just going way too high, and they're going around players I rather have. There's also, especially when it comes to the running back position, players where their early season roles kind of murky. They could get leapfrogged by a backup. Last season, guys like Mike Davis, Myles Gaskin were kind of red flags for me. I didn't know exactly who was going to leapfrog Mike Davis. I had no idea it was going to be Earl Patterson, but you kind of just know the players that are just being drafted too high. So those are sort of the red flags I look for, is just incoming regression and just murky situations.
Yeah, 92% of the players you're fading in a 12-2 league. That is the kind of data-driven negativity you can only get on a Fantasy Flex podcast. Love it. For me, I think the big thing I always look for is guys entering the season hurt. I think that's always a red flag because, statistically, you can't really predict injuries, but we have also seen that statistically, having one injury tends to lead to more injuries. So, if a guy is even on the injury report, he's more likely to be back on the injury report later in the season, things like that. So that's always a red flag for me. I think another one, it depends on position, but with running backs, you always kind of want to look at that offensive line. I think a lot of times if things go downhill that we didn't see coming, it's the offensive line. And then Ian, to your point about certain player archetypes, I think, it's always, you got to kind of watch out for these wide receivers, these bigger bodied wide receivers as they age. Sometimes they can fall off a cliff a little bit faster than somebody that's a little more agile and doesn't really rely on his body as much to get open. So,
Kenny Galladay on that Dennis Bryant trajectory, man. I freaking hate it because, man, people act like Galladay is just like the worst wide receiver to grace the planet. And I get it. He's looking like that in the training camp footage, but not that long ago, guys, when him and Stafford were making some goodness happen each and every week out there, it seemed like. But yeah, Chris, especially to your first point, big difference between someone being injury prone and already being injured. Like, I don't like to assume that a perfectly healthy Christian McCaffrey is going to get hurt this year because he sprained his ankle last year. With that said, someone like a Michael Gallup, Jameson Williams obviously has, far more kind of obstacles to overcome before they get to week one.
Yeah, absolutely. And you got to kind of decide on your risk tolerance because even, there was even a guy like DeAndre Swift last year. I remember fading him and he had some really good games, but at the end of the day, he played 13 games and you could kind of see that coming just because of how he entered the season. So it's like, if you're okay with 13 games or something in that range, then you can take the player. But I think it's definitely something you have to watch out for. All right, let's start with running back because I think running back is the one, like, historically, I just feel like the most players tend to bust, or at least the most we remember because we tend to draft these guys early in the draft. So Ian, who are some players that you have pegged as a potential bust at the running back position?
In this middle range, again, it's a mixture of, I don't love the running backs going here, and also I still like the wide receivers. There's upside quarterback and tight ends option available, but it's that, fabled RB dead zone again, kind of like the end of round 4.
The frozen pond on this podcast.
There we go. Frozen pond. I like it. Okay. So it's like, like end of round 4, kind of, depends where Cam Akers is going these days. He's even falling to round 6 sometimes, but end of round 4 to basically beginning of round 7, when I'm seeing guys like Josh Jacobs, still going around there, the Elijah Mitchells of the world, Antonio Gibson before it really plummeted out of him. I know he's not really in that range anymore, but these early down backs that are stuck in committees that aren't going to catch the ball as much as we want them to. Like, I think these guys that I talked about probably can catch the ball. Like Nick Chubb and Derrick Henry, I'm sure they can go out there and catch a swing pass, but they're not, the Austin Eckler, Christian McCaffreys of the world. But it's just the fact that we're taking a chance on these early down running backs, really just because I think people panic when they're drafting, when you get the wide receivers and tight ends early and you're looking at a roster with only one running back in round 5 and 6, and you're like, I should get more. But I think it's unique this year, guys, having the Kareem Hunt, Cordero Patterson, Chase Edmonds range, where I know Edmonds is starting to go up a little bit, but having those sort of explosive pass-catching running backs available in rounds like 8 and 9 sometimes, like, I felt better than ever going with, the hero RB, superhero RB, whatever the hell we want to call it, getting 1 or 2 RBs early, because we have those workhorses in the first 3 rounds I like, but that middle area is where it gets muddled, man. Miles Sanders, the Seahawks guys, depending on where they go. I always say, don't hate the player, hate the ADP. If Antonio Gibson's now going to be going round 9, round 10, and we're not sure exactly what's going on with Brian Robinson, I can get behind that, just not exactly in round 5. So I'd say, again, Elijah Mitchell, Josh Jacobs, even David Montgomery to an extent, although his last usage looked all right. Those are 3 guys that, based on both, their personal situation and what I think their volume's going to look like, and just the players are giving up around them, I have not been drafting much of them at all.
Yeah, that's kind of how I approach it too. It's like I look at that whole frozen pond here as kind of like, if I can get him in like round 8 or 9, then I'm fine with it. But like, I'm like, if I'm drafting them in round 5, I'm pretty sure they're going to be a bust. Like, it's like, why would you even do it? It just doesn't make sense to me. But Sean, what about you? Who's some guys at running back that you think could potentially bust?
Yeah, so the 3 backs I highlighted are Elijah Mitchell, J.K. Dobbins, and Devin Singletary. And again, these are all 3 backs that I like them. There's going to be times during the season where I use them heavily in DFS and spots. But just starting with Elijah Mitchell, it's tough to ever trust the most expensive 49ers running back. I mean, this is all about the scheme, not necessarily about the individual talent. However, Eli Mitchell is probably the one running back that can probably buck this trend. But his role is going to be fairly limited to those least valuable touches. Trey Lance and Deebo Samuel could eat into potential goal line work. The Niners typically use a different back on passing downs. I mean, they use their fullback Kyle Juszczyk in the passing game. They typically have some back like a Jermichael Hasty run routes. So Mitchell's going to be, constrained to those carries in between the 20s that don't offer much fancy value. And he's prone to, Shanahanigans, where he can get benched outright by a Jeff Wilson. We don't know, what's going to happen. So Mitchell's like the ideal frozen pond candidate. And then J.K. Dobbins, you mentioned it, Raybon, just a guy dealing with injuries heading into the season. It might be by week 5 or 6 before he's even 100%. So I think in the RB 26 range, that's a red flag for me. He's going to be more of a frustrating touchdown dependent RB3 flex option until he's 100%. And then Singletary, I mean, I loved his usage at the end of last year. I think he was the RB2 over the final 6 or 7 weeks. I mean, that when he is used as a workhorse back, I love him. But, it sounds like Zach Moss, unfortunately, is like the Undertaker coming back from the dead gift. So he could eat into goal line work. And then they drafted James Cook in the 2nd round. So they're going to use him on passing down. So the Bills already don't have that much volume to go around for the running backs anyway. So that's why I'm worried about Singletary in the RB 28 range. And again, this is the range where I'm getting guys like AJ Dillon, Kareem Hunt, Tony Pollard, who, they're technically the backups, but they have a much, much higher ceiling. So that's why these 3 backs in this range I'm typically avoiding, and I consider them bust candidates.
Yeah, Dobbins is a guy that's always the first guy I mentioned. I've been talking about this for months now. We have no guarantees of what's going on with him. Everything I've read sounds pretty pessimistic in terms of his availability for week 1. They just went out and signed Kenyon Drake.
Yep.
So there's just a lot going on with Dobbins. And Dobbins is in one of those schemes. I know we love, the Ravens because they run a lot, but that's another scheme where it's not always about the back either. So
yards per carry is one of the most overrated fantasy stats we have out there. And it's not that I get it. Dobbins is awesome, but he's not going to catch the ball. And even when Ingram was out of the picture his rookie year, Gus Edwards was still staying super involved. So even if Dobbins is healthy and stuff, it's still going to be a multi-back committee, whether we like it or not.
Yeah, and they don't care who they use. I mean, look, they used Devontae Freeman for 16 games last year. They dusted him off.
Lev Bell.
They'll use anyone in this backfield. So Dobbins always sticks out to me because I just don't feel like he's dropped far enough. I still see him going, people drafting him as a top 24 back in certain points. And I don't think you can count on him, not just week 1, but early in the season in general. So he's a guy, and, I look at even a Cam Akers, he's going 19, and there's just a lot of question marks about, number 1, his health, because now we're hearing he hasn't been practicing, and Henderson's ahead of him in terms of health, which we didn't really kind of weren't privy to until recently. Then we hear all camp that he's splitting number 1 backfield duties with Henderson, and even Sean McVay has said that as well. So in this range of the draft, Ian, like you said, it's about the alternative, the opportunity cost. And I just can't afford to take a running back who might miss a ton of games in a premium pick like this, or might not get a full workload, when I could take a Terry McLaurin who's going to get 40% of his team's air yards or something like that. So I think, Akers stands out to me, and J.K. Dobbins. And then, as far as the rest of these guys, I can see concerns with, even a guy like Breece Hall, who is going to start the year as the number 2 behind Carter. And then we're kind of banking on him to take over, but it's an offense that's not going to score a ton of touchdowns, you don't think? So he could be too high. You already mentioned Mitchell. I think Jacobs has, some bust potential as well, although I like his upside to kind of balance it out. But anyone who's too high, it's
Chris, what about Dameon Pierce, though? Because he's about to be in that conversation.
I know.
I think it's going to cost a round 5 pick to get him. And I'll tell you what, I'm not liking round 5 Dameon Pierce. A couple weeks ago, round 8, round 9, okay. Right. Not this.
Yeah.
He's still playing on the Texans, man. They're still going to use Rex and probably Dario Gubawale on pass downs. Come on.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's what people who don't like fully always look at these like snap counts and things don't realize. Like this team is gonna use other backs, especially in passing situations, and it's a battle line. And so you're gonna have like terrible game script every game pretty much for the Tech, except when they probably play the Colts on opening day, and they'll probably because the Colts never win on opening
Don't
day.
get that one.
Yeah. But trade him after week 1. No, but I love Pierce. Yeah, hate the spot that he's gonna end up on. All right, let's shift gears and go to wide receiver. Ian, who are some guys at wide receiver that you think could bust?
2 earlier round ones that are sticking out are Deebo Samuel, 16th player overall. Like that's the issue for me. If I can get Deebo in round 3, I think that's fine. But like right now, PFF projections, we have him 26th in targets among wide receivers with 110. If he gets the role he had in weeks 1 through 9 last year, it's going to be fantastic. But his fantasy points per game didn't change when he started playing running back more. So people didn't really care. And okay, points are points. He was at 21 versus 20 weeks 1 through 9 versus weeks 10 through the NFC Championship. His expected PPR points per game went from 17.1 to 12.7. We don't want rush attempts when they take the place of targets. If it's a guy getting 100 targets and we can throw 20 rush attempts on, great, fine. We'll take the extra touches. But we talk about this with running backs all the time. Like the Deebo Samuel role, it needs to be done by a guy who's apparently going to be the most efficient running back in all of football. That's what Deebo was last year. That's why it worked. I don't like having to bet on that behind an offensive line that might not be as dominant and a healthier team that could actually now be using guys like Jeff Wilson, Trey Sermon, Tyrion Davis-Price, their new third-round rookie, more so in that running back role. So then we're left with Deebo adjusting to a new quarterback in Trey Lance. And I think we saw Nick Mullins average over 8 yards per attempt. Like I think Shanny's going to scheme enough, easy, quick hitters there for Lance, and having, just beasts like Deebo, Kittle, and Brandon Ayuk out there, like Lance will be fine. But we see this with the dual threat quarterbacks. All this is really good for the quarterback, not so good for the rest of the pieces in the offense. So for Deebo, it's just one of those situations where I got to take a player 16th overall who could understandably just finish second on his own team in targets. Like it's a lot to pay. And yeah, he's amazingly talented. I get it. But so are the players going around him. Devontae Adams, Tyreek Hill, like CeeDee Lamb sometimes, man. I'm not fading like Deebo Samuel for some scrub with more volume. I'm fading him for a fellow baller wide receiver that objectively has a much higher volume floor. So for me with Deebo, not taking him in the middle of round 2. And then also, man, just on Chris's point about not wanting these guys that are actively injured right now, Jalen Waddle with this soft tissue injury, 3 weeks apparently not practicing, already was a little bit steep for me. I mean, we've seen an average over the last decade 4.3 teams have produced multiple top 24 PPR wide receivers in the same season. And yeah, okay, I can see Tua taking a nice little leap forward, but really, is he going to be one of those quarterbacks to enable 2 top 24 wide receivers? It could happen, but you see the Bengals, the Chargers, Bucks, Bills, Broncos, Rams, Vikings, Raiders. You start to kind of quickly come up with these other teams that I think make a bit more sense. So Waddle was someone that I think was always just going to have a hard time in a slow pace and potentially more run-heavy offense that I think we're giving credit for out over there in Miami, depending on how much Mike McDaniel takes away from Kyle Shanahan. But Jalen Waddle is a number 2 wide receiver, seemingly. I don't know why else they paid Tyreek all that money, being priced really far more like a wide receiver 1. So I've been drafting guys like, Terry McLaurin, obviously the wide receiver 1s, but Terry McLaurin. And I just think that Jalen Waddle probably deserves to be way more kind of in that Gabriel Davis, Allen Robinson mix. I don't think that in this offense, he should be prioritized amongst the other wide receiver 2s out there.
I got Gabriel Davis over Jalen Waddle. Like that, because to your point, it's like if a team is going to support 2 wide receivers, it's going to be the Bills or the Dolphins. I think it's going to be the Bills. Sean, what about you?
Oh yeah. I'm piggybacking on Jalen Waddle at wide receiver 15. That stood out for a while now, and yeah, he's already dealing with an injury. Plus he's sitting on the top of a massive tier. There's 16 wide receivers until you see 10 fantasy points drop off in my projections. So it just goes to show it's really tight. You can get guys similar to Waddle later. And like you said, he's the number 2 wide receiver in the Dolphins offense. I don't know if that can really support 2, borderline wide receiver 1s. The Bills and Bucks are the 2 teams I would say could do that. And Waddle, I mean, he was amazing last year, but he did benefit from Devontae Parker and Will Fuller missing significant amount of time. Plus, the offensive line was terrible, so they would just dink and dunk to Waddle, with the offensive line being a bit better. And Cedric Wilson's an upgrade, I think, for the wide receiver 3 slot, so he's going to have more competition for targets this year. And then my other guy, this is not going to be popular, but Amon-Ra St. Brown at wide receiver 21.
What?
I'm going there. I'm going there because
wow.
This is one of those things where I'm just targeting guys like Brandon Cooks, Allen Robinson, or Gabe Davis here. I just think they have more upside. And with St. Brown, like, obviously he has a massive, massive floor, right? He is by far the number one target in this offense. He only saw 4 end zone targets on 119 targets last year. So I think he is going to see some touchdown regression off of his 5 last year. So he's going to be more of the DJ Moore, Jacoby Myers types where he's just, he's going to rack up catches every week, but he could have times where he's, has a touchdown drought, which could be frustrating. So I just think at wide receiver 21, I wish there was a little bit more touchdown upside there. Again, I love him. I'm going to target him in DFS almost every week, but when it comes to his overall upside, I think it's more limited than people realize.
Ooh, I don't know about that. I mean, I've
That is
been
a
looking
little
at
high.
If he falls outside of the top 25, I'm taking him. Like, let me be clear. I'm not saying, fade on me sucks. I'm just saying that's the range where you can get like an Allen Robinson or Gabe Davis, who I just absolutely love. So that's my point.
I don't know, man. They've been I've heard they're still using him as like in the backfield in camp, and like they really think he's like their star of their team. So I like.
He was much more fun when we got him in round 14.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, we were hyping him up. It looked like it was going to be a bust for a while there, and then he just that second half of the season, he really just.
I remember we got the Goff was like, oh yeah, he gave the Cooper Kupp comp, and then like it was Amon-Ra's birthday, and he didn't even catch a single pass, and I threw my hands up. I was like, all right, it's not happening then. The guy can't even catch a pass on his own birthday, and then week 16 comes along. It's like, what the hell is going on out here?
Yeah, it's I mean, I get he has that 1 year. Some people might be like skeptical, but I like Amon-Ra St. Brown. I
like him. And to be fair, he went off when both Swift and Hawkinson were out. I know that point's brought up, but it does matter just when it comes to creating projections and stuff. So I think he has a really high floor, but his touchdown upside is limited. That's all.
For me, you guys already said it. It's Jaylen Waddle. I just think that, coming into the year hurt, new number 1 receiver. And that's what you're kind of banking on Waddle, because he wasn't like a high ADOT guy either. And, like he's got to kind of get a ton of targets to really pay off when you're taking him as a wide receiver too. So I think that at this point, there's just guys I'd rather have more going after him. So Jaylen Waddle for me at wide receiver. Any bust, Ian? I know that you kind of mentioned Burrow before. Any bust at the quarterback or tight end position that you see?
I mentioned Burrow, and just again, literally, right, I'm looking at Fantasy Pros consensus ADP. Burrow pick 56, Derek Carr pick 109, Kirk Cousins pick 112, and then Josh Allen like pick 22. I won't take any quarterback at the end of round 2. 9-year-old Sean will, but 29-year-old Ian will not be taking the early round quarterback there. At tight end, I will say similar to that running back range that we kind of have, in the end of round 7 through like round 9. I do think having Goddard, Ertz, and Dawson Knox there, like that's the last kind of group of 3 tight ends that I really want to get and leave my fantasy draft with. We have a bunch of late round guys, but I'm really confident about 10 tight ends. So for that reason, Dalton Schultz, pick 64. He's really going next to a lot of those running backs we talked about not liking. I just think, when it's Dalton Schultz versus like Kyler Murray or versus Amon-Ra St. Brown, when maybe a couple of weeks ago when his ADP was still up a little bit, but I'm taking the other guy, every single time in that equation. Because for me, I think it's a tier with Schultz, Hawkinson, Goddard, Ertz, and Knox. I see them all in the same tier basically. And the fact that Schultz is going closer to Waller and sometimes even Kittle, I can't get behind that. So I understand the available opportunities in the Cowboys offense, but man, I've watched every single game Dalton Schultz has played. This is one of the most mid tight ends we've ever been drafting as a consensus top 6 ever. So I have him ranked as a top 6 tight end as well. I have him ranked as my tight end 6, which is where he's going. But I have him right next to these other guys, not multiple rounds ahead of him.
That's a good point on Schultz, because I was just thinking about this too. And, everything we've been seeing out of Cowboys camp and here, and Jake Ferguson has been playing really well, and he's going to be like a part of the offense from day one, it sounds like. And Hendershot is also playing well. So like, remember how Dalton Schultz came up, right? He was the second guy second fiddle to who was it? Blake Jarwin.
Yep.
Yeah. And then, Jarwin's in and out of the lineup. Schultz eventually puts up some good games, and then he takes over. Last year, he runs a route like 80% of the time, and there's like no competition in that Cowboys tight end room. But now, It sounds like there is, and now they might have more of that, like Jarwin Schultz split again with Ferguson in the mix. So I think that's a good call on just kind of tempering expectations with Schultz, because there is a lower floor this year than I think there was last year when there was just once they released Jarwin, especially, there was just nobody there.
And one more thing, even if this only helps one listener, like, don't draft Noah Fant for the love of God. I keep seeing this dude like up way too high in these ADPs. So I'm really in a draft where it happens, but my goodness, people, don't do it.
Yeah, he's like tight end like 21 or something.
Yeah, even that seems high.
Sean, what about you? Any busted a quarterback or tight end?
Yeah, I like the Joe Burrow call. Like Joe Burrow and Dak Prescott, those are quarterbacks that you might as well just punt, because those are offenses I want to invest in their skill players. Like, don't get me wrong, I still love investing in those offenses, but Dak Prescott's losing his top receiver, Amari Cooper, although CeeDee Lamb is probably an upgrade at this point in his career. But the depth chart, it took a bit of a hit. They lost Cedric Wilson, they lost James Washington, Michael Gallup might not be able to play for the first few weeks. And Jalen Tolbert will probably be the number 2 receiver, and he's had mixed reviews. So with the Tyron Smith injury, everything's adding up to Dak, maybe regressing a bit this year. And he doesn't offer as much rushing upside after his 2020 injury. So there's just not as much to like. Either I'm still investing in CeeDee Lamb, might take a swing on Jalen Tolbert, but Dak himself, I think, is a bit pricey. And then at tight end, everybody's ranked about where they should be, but I think Darren Waller is a tight end I've been kind of passing on, because he might not be ready for week 1. So Raybon, like you said, he's already entering the season with a bit of a hamstring injury. Last year, we thought he was going to miss a game with like knee and back issues, and he ended up missing like 5 or so. So we have to remember, he was a late bloomer. He's turning 30 years old. I think it's next week. So he's not a spring chicken anymore. So these injuries might linger longer than they should. But either way, Devontae Adams being on the team is going to eat into his target share. And Waller hasn't really been an end zone threat for some reason. So I think that's going to cap his fantasy upside. So in this range, I'd rather take one of the top 3 tight ends, or just wait until, some value later on. I think taking Darren Waller is a bit of a reach right now.
Yeah, Waller is a guy that's I've been getting a little bit more concerned about, just because it's another one of those situations like Waddle where they have guys that can take up a ton of targets in Devontae Adams and Hunter Renfrow. Those guys get open pretty much every play. So
are we positive he's really hurt though? We had the contract extension.
Yeah, that's the other thing though. But it's and that could be it. But it's definitely something to monitor. And either way, he kind of came up, like, the reason we love Waller is because he's just a target hog, right? Yeah. And like now with we saw it in week 1, he was great last year, but like as the season wore on, Renfrow was there, and he was kind of eating into Waller's targets a little bit, and now you have Adams there, so there definitely will be a downgrade to his target share regardless.
He definitely no longer has the, like, I'm going to lead my team in targets and have 150 range of outcomes.
Yeah. Like now I think like that guy probably this year is Kyle Pitts. Like, if Atlanta actually throws the ball enough, he could be that guy. Kind of like the way Andrews kind of turned into that guy in a low volume team as well. Quarterback, Aaron Rodgers, I think that he's still QB 10, still going off the board, in the top 100. Again, like Ian, to your point, there's other guys you can take here that have similar upside at this point and just better skill positions. Are the Packers really going to go out and throw the ball over the yard this year? Probably not, but will the Vikings? Maybe. Will the Raiders? Probably, so there are a lot of other and then you're not even talking about guys who can just run like Justin Fields. So, even Stafford and Russell Wilson now and Trey Lance, all these guys are still going after Aaron Rodgers. So I can't really get behind that. And tight end, I agree. I think, Schultz is a guy that I'm kind of steering away from, just because I think at that point, if you've missed out on the top, 3-4 guys, I think you might as well just wait and see if like a Goddard or Knox falls a little later. I wanted to kind of talk about, since we talked about all these busts, but there are a lot of players that, people kind of cite in these type of shows or articles or whatever. So, I wanted to ask, like, who's one player that gets commonly thrown around as a potential bust that you're actually high on?
I think Travis Etienne is a pretty popular running back. People right off they try to start grouping him into kind of that frozen pond, as you guys put it, group. And I don't think he belongs there. I think this guy has a chance to be, the AFC's basically version of DeAndre Swift, this explosive pass catching running back on a terrible team where we look up and it's like, oh, look, the Jaguars lost by 17 again, but Etienne had an extra 40 receiving yards and a garbage time touchdown. Like, so we're good. The James Robinson coming back, similar to J.K. Dobbins, we really have no idea if he's going to be starting in week 1 or what his role is going to be. So even giving James Robinson or Snoop Connor or whoever like 50% of the team carry share, Etienne is still someone in a pretty wide open passing game playing alongside his former, college quarterback that I think has a chance to actually, be clearing 60 or so targets without too much of a problem. Right now, PFF projecting him for 60 targets, 211 rush attempts. And that just seems like a pretty reasonable floor to me if James Robinson even is back to his full form. So we got, again, this whole offseason, the Deebo Samuel role. Like, no, Travis Etienne's a running back. Just because Urban Meyer put him out wide receiver for a week of practice last year doesn't mean the Deebo Samuel role is there. The Christian McCaffrey role, the I don't leave the field because I can do everything role, maybe that's there for Travis Etienne. So I know the history of Doug Peterson, isn't fantastic here, but you look at the kind of guys going alongside Travis Etienne, Zeke, Montgomery, even Brees Hall, like Jacobs, previously Antonio Gibson. And I just think Etienne, man, having that explosive, just theoretical, I don't even think it's theoretical. We saw it in preseason, really the first game. Second game is a little fluky because of those drives, but Etienne really has a chance. I mean, we could look up after week 1. He's playing 80% snaps, and all of a sudden this dude's like locked in as an RB1, or he's still out there, flirting with 5 to 7 targets potentially every single week. So full PPR, I will take that.
Sean, what about you?
I'm going with Gabe Davis. He's been somebody that a lot of people are calling a bust. They just don't get the.
I haven't heard him.
Are you kidding? I'll send you articles. I'll show you what I'm talking about after.
I hear no Gabe Davis slander.
You're in our bubble.
It's all muted.
You're in our media bubble, our pro. But I'm telling you, man, and people they shit on it. They shit on the hype train because he went off for 200 yards and 4 touchdowns. Like we're expecting that every week. Getting him, the wide receiver 25 slot. I just think when it comes to him, it depends where your priors were on Gabe Davis before he went off against the Chiefs. And heading into last season, I was super high on Gabe Davis. You were too, Raybon, where, once they signed Emmanuel Sanders, I'm like, okay, we got to pump the brakes, probably need 1 more year. So we were already high on him. And that's why we weren't that surprised that he went off. But I think a lot of people are overlooking him still. And anytime he's been asked to step up and see more playing time, he's produced. So that's why I'm still a big believer. And like I said, Raybon, after this, I will show you the evidence.
I don't want to see it.
Okay, well, I'm sending it no matter what. So
oh man,
be ready for it.
For me, I'll go Cordero Patterson. Actually, I think Cordero Patterson, like people just kind of writing him off because down the stretch last year he had a couple bad games, and but if you kind of paid attention to this, this offseason usage, they treated him, they gave him the starter treatment. They're kind of keeping him in bubble wrap. He's a guy that they use a ton in the red zone, and he's gonna have opportunities because now you have London, you have Pitts there to take some of the attention off. So I just think they're going to be able to scheme up a ton of ways to give him high leverage targets. And like he's your, you talk about Deebo Samuel and going too high. This is your arbitrage Deebo Samuel, right? Like it's like a guy's going to line up at receiver some weeks, running back some weeks. He'll be used extensively in the red zone. They need to use him because they don't, they only have so many guys that they can give touches to. And look at this running back depth chart. You got Tyler Algier, Damian Williams, Avery Williams, a former cornerback, I think is still on the roster. Like there's a lot there's going to be a lot of chances for Patterson just in the backfield alone. And then he's also their second best wide receiver, unless you consider Pitts a wide receiver, which he essentially is. So I really like getting Patterson, down there at the end of that frozen pond when everyone already drafted J.K. Dobbins and Rashad Penny, who I think Patterson has just as much of a chance at putting up value as those guys.
CPAT was legit an upside RB1 before he got hurt last year. And everyone's like, well, he's probably not going to do that again. Okay, he's now the cheapest starting running back in all of fantasy. It's similar to the Mon-Ra stuff when he was at value going closer to the wide receiver 30 line. It's like, he's probably not going to be the overall wide receiver 2 again, but that's kind of cool. We have a stretch that tells us that they're able to produce at that level.
Yeah. And, watch him take a kickback for a touchdown like week 1. So
he needs one more. He needs one more for the all-time record.
He's going
Wow.
for it. He's going for that one. So it's happening.